Hi, my name is Jessica. Today we have with us author Angshu Dasgupta. He is the author of Fern Road. It's his first book. It's a delightful coming of age story about a boy dealing with identity and gender issues, and it's set in the Kolkata of the 80s. So, congratulations on your first book, sir. Do tell us a little bit about it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks for that lovely introduction. This is a book that I've been meaning to write for a while, and I finally, it took me a while to write it, and it's about, as you said, it's about a boy who's growing up and dealing with certain confusions about who he is. And it's not a very long book. It's a short book, simple story, but yeah, that's what it's about.
All right, great. So you're a computer programmer, is that correct? By profession, that is.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. So how did you come into writing?
Yes.
Like, how did that happen?
I don't know. So when I was in college, I started writing songs, and the songs were terrible. So I gave up writing anything at all for a while. And then I started basically riding around South India on my bike. So I started writing travelogues. And those are private. I mean, those basically deal with, things I've seen and things I've felt while I was riding around. And while writing those, I thought that, okay, this is getting boring because this is something that has already happened. So instead, why not try to write fiction? So, of course, life happens. It took me around 15 years to again decide to actually give it a shot. And because and now I have time also because my kids are a little grown up, and even at work pressure is less, so I got time to, that's how I got time. It was always a matter of time. I mean, it was always a matter of getting the time. And and fiction, because as a kid I read like a crazy person. I just read whatever I could lay my hands on. I raided my mother's bookshelf, I raided my friends' bookshelves, and yeah, that is basically it.
Yeah, so it's so evident, by the bookshelf behind you that you must have been and still are an avid reader. So yes, definitely that sounds.
Yeah.
So also about the protagonist Orko in the book. I'm so sorry if I'm not pronouncing it right. Please do correct me if I'm not.
No, it's Orko. You're right. Yeah, you're that's absolutely the right pronunciation.
All right, great. Thank you, sir. So it's like we talked about, he's dealing with a lot of confusion, a lot of identity issues, LGBTQ issues, a sense of self that he's still getting acquainted with. So this is a very sensitive, story to deal with and to write about. So how did you approach it?
First of all, I'll just clarify that this is not a memoir. This is fiction. But having said that, when I was a kid, these things that my mother would tell me, that's not for boys, that's for girls, or for example, when you're a young child, you have both kinds of, you have boys and girls as friends. But as you are grow older, when you're 12 or 14, things start getting segregated. So I used to find this really intriguing, and that sort of feeling stayed with me. And I thought that why is this? What goes inside a child's mind that leads to this particular bifurcation of how young children lead their lives? And what if a child was confused about, okay, no, this doesn't really work for me, so what should I do now? And that was the germ of the story, and I just started writing it, and it grew with the characters. Basically, there was no plot or anything that I had in mind. I just knew that, okay, I have a boy who thinks he's going to grow up and become like his mother. Okay, so where do we go from there?
Yeah. All right. Okay. So, but I meant more in the sense of that how to not write it in a way that is not influential and yet allows the reader to make up his own mind. So that's like a very thin line to straddle. So how did you approach writing
Yeah.
the book?
So if yeah, it's all about, at least in this particular book, it's all about the point of view. So the point of view throughout the entire book is that of the protagonist. There is no omniscient voice, providing commentary or providing judgment or providing prescription about what's going on in Orko's life. It's all about how he's observing and experiencing life. And that is, I think, that was the decision that allowed me to keep that balance. That, okay, no, I'm not going to, provide a path or a prescription. I'm just going to say, okay, this is what happened. Now you figure out from here, uh, and that's of course a poser to the reader, that you figure out from here what's going on in this boy's head.
That's yeah.
So that's
yeah.
yeah.
All right. That's great, sir. Thank you for that. Also, you're a first-time author, right? So, how
Yes.
were you discovered by your publisher? Like, what was your experience like? The whole journey from being discovered to being published and up till here, like how you got to here.
Okay, so it's a longish story, but okay, here goes. So when I started writing the book, I didn't really think that I will publish it. I just thought, okay, if like 35 people read it and out of them 5 people like it, I'm good. Okay. So, and it took me a long time to write it, because first of all, it was my first book, and second of all, I was trying to balance my work life and writing. And of course, I made a lot of mistakes along the way, a lot of revisions. So it took me about 4 or 5 years. So when I was almost done with the book, I had the opportunity to read a passage from the book to the director of UWAP. That's my Australian publisher. And she said that, okay, send me the manuscript. And I sent her the manuscript, and within 10 days, she said, okay, so we'd like to do this book. You'll have to put in a lot of work, but if you're up for it, then yeah, let's do it. And of course, I was up for it. I said, okay, I'll do whatever. Let's go forward on this. And then after I think about a month after it was published in Australia, Speaking Tiger picked up the South Asian rights, and that's how it's in India.
Wow, sir, that's quite a journey. Also, how was the response that you got initially when it was first published in Australia? Like, what was the response you got from that end?
In general, the reviews have been good in Australia. In India too, there are a couple of reviews that made me wonder, okay, could I have done this differently? Things like that. But in general, the reception has been good. And I, of course, don't know how many copies have sold, because it's not been a year yet. So I think you get a sort of report after a year about the sales of the book, etc. So I don't know. And of course, with the lockdown, I don't know how many people actually are buying books at this point in time. But in general, from what people have told me, people who have read the book and some of the reviews, the reception has been better than I had imagined, basically.
Great. So it's like you said that, based on some reviews, you did think about, okay, I could have written this differently, or I could have done that differently. So would you, if you could, would you change anything in the book based on the feedback and the response you've gotten? Would you consider doing it if you could?
Of course, you always want to change the book, right? Even before the responses came in. So after I had submitted the manuscript, I was reading it every day. And I thought, oh, no, I wish I had done this differently. Oh, no, I had done that differently. So that is, I think, normal. And an author friend of mine told me that you should not read your book after you've submitted the manuscript, because you'll always think that this part is horrible and you want to change it. Coming to the review, yes, one of the reviews did mention that it is a bit of an old-fashioned story. Now, that particular comment, yes, I agree, it's an old-fashioned story because it's set in the 1980s. And the only way I could write this story was set in the 1980s. I'll explain why. It's because, see, nowadays, if a boy like Orko is growing up, there'll be a bunch of people who will tell him that, okay, you're probably transgender, or you'll have a bunch of sort of diagnoses about the situation.
Yes.
And that sort of gets in the way of the child themselves figuring out what is going on in their heads. So, and that is the thing that I wanted to focus on. Okay, how does a child deal with the fact that he's different from his peers?
Yeah. All right. So, but you wouldn't change a thing. So that's a good thing, right, about the book.
I would change several things, but not the core of the book. The core of the book would remain the same.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So also, so like you said that, you wanted to show how a child responds to his surroundings and how he, adapts around it and learns more about himself that way. So that also requires a sort of, a certain kind of tact, because you are writing about children and, from the perspective of a child that way. So So what all what all discretions did you have to keep in mind while writing from that perspective, from a child's perspective?
Okay, so I had to it took me a lot of time to get in the mind space of that child, because I had to remember, okay, at age 8, what did I know, and what sort of things would the grown-ups talk to me about, and what would I observe around me, about people, about places. It's not just about what you know now that you didn't know then. It's also about things like if a child is like 4 feet tall, the child is going to see the world differently from someone who is like 5.5 or almost 6 feet tall, right? So I had to train my mind to inhabit that space, and it took some time, because the first few drafts, it wasn't at all, it didn't look like it was from the point of view of a child. But yeah, it took time.
All right. So you have talked about, how while writing the book, a lot of your own childhood memories were resurfacing and you were reminiscing.
Yeah.
So, but Fern Road is essentially a work of fiction, right? So,
yes.
While writing it, when did you draw the line between writing pure fantasy and incorporating real life events based on your childhood memories? Like, how do you draw the line?
See, the point is that there is a certain texture of the novel, right? That consists of, I'll give you an example of, of visuals and of smells and of actual tactile sensations of touching, of seeing or hearing or observing other people, right? and then there's the plot.
Mm.
So the texture is obviously drawn from things that I myself have observed or felt, and the plot is where the fiction comes in. So, for example, the characters are also drawn from people I know, or maybe people who I've heard about from other people. So that's how it goes. I mean, it's very difficult, I think, to write pure fiction, to have nothing of your own life seep into the story that you're writing. That's very hard. I don't think I could do that actually.
Okay. All right. So there are a couple of questions from the reviewer of Fern Road, who reviewed Fern Road for
Yeah.
Simple Pencil. So she'd like to ask. I'm just going to read it verbatim.
Yeah.
How did you maintain the fluidity between the present tense, that is your narration, and your past tense, that's your memories? So how did you maintain, like a very seamless flow of narration there?
Okay, it's interesting because that's something I really struggled with in the beginning, because I started writing it in past tense, in simple past entirely, right?
Yeah.
And then I discovered that it sort of was losing the immediacy that present tense gives you. So then I moved to present tense. But when I was talking about things that had occurred prior to the, the point in the story, I would switch to past tense. But sometimes those transitions would be a little ragged. So then what I tried to do was basically break it in terms of scenes. So there would be a scene when Orko would be thinking about something that had happened in the past, and then there would be a sort of a take out from there and go back to the past, describe that entire thing, and then come back here. And again, that took several iterations to get right. And I think my editor at UWAP in Australia, she was a huge help when it came to that.
Into this. Okay.
Yeah.
So it takes really blood, sweat, and tears, like literal blood, sweat, and tears to finish.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I just give you an example. So after I had submitted my manuscript, it took me more than 12 months before, more than a year actually, before it was actually published, because there were suggestions and questions, and I had to answer those questions, and I had to evaluate those suggestions whether they made sense for the book or not. So it was a long process.
Okay. Also, the other question from the reviewer is, what is your opinion on adding nativity to a story with the use of local language and landscapes? Because your book is so rich with Kolkata and its ways from the 80s. So so they'd like to know.
Yeah, so that's actually two questions. One is adding local flavor with things like the things that are actually native to Kolkata and very peculiar to Kolkata, things like that. And then there is language. So about the first, I think I would be unable to write a story that did not have that was not really grounded in the place where it is set. So it has to have this stuff, because for example, if the story were to be moved to Mumbai, it would be different, right? The characters would be different, their interactions would be different, all this would be different. But as far as language is concerned, I've seen a lot of people use Bengali or Hindi in English writing and do it very, very effortlessly. For me, it is hard. I'm not able to do that so effortlessly, and I wish I could do that. But if you've noticed, the very little Bangla is actually in my book. But yeah, of course, the environment is very important.
Okay. So the environment that you're talking about, how you said that characters were also based on some people that you knew and that they knew. So, what do if they are aware that a character is inspired on their personality, what did they think about it? And what conversations did you have with them about this?
Actually, unfortunately, pretty much all the people who have based characters off of in the book, they are not alive anymore. So they didn't really have a say in this thing.
I'm so sorry to know that. Okay.
No. Yeah, that's just how it goes. Yeah.
How it goes, yes. So, also about coming back to the childhood memories bit of it, are some of your childhood memories there in the book, whether as they were or inspired? If they are, could you share some?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For example, there is this section about the Titanic and the Dhakuria Lake, right? So I remember when I was, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years old, my mama and I were sitting by the lake, and he told me the story of the Titanic. So that's there in the book. And for example, the posters in Orko's room were posters in my room. Like Tracy Chapman and Led Zeppelin were in my room. Yes. Yeah, there are things like that, definitely. Wow. And there is a section about a parrot and what Orko thinks about the parrot. And I remember thinking exactly that about a parrot that I saw when I was 10 years old.
Wow. It's amazing that you still remembered what you thought when you saw a parrot when you were 10 years old. Wow.
I think all of us remember. We just have to dig deep enough to, bring out those memories. All of us remember. And you know what happens when we grow old? Like when we are like grandparents, then, for example, grandparents tell grandchildren how things were when they were kids, right? How do they remember? I'm sure all of us remember. It's just that in this phase of our lives, we are so busy, those memories tend to get suppressed. They are not really available at the surface. So if we dig, we'll find them, definitely.
Yes, that is really true. That's so true. Also, coming back to the writing bit of it, what would you say to anyone that wants to write a similar coming of age story? That what should be the essential elements in such a book? Like it has to be there for any coming of age story.
Well, there are several that I've read, and they're all so different. But if I were to choose one thing that has to be there, that is, progress in terms of character growth. In terms of, okay, this person was a certain kind at the beginning of the story. Mm-hmm. Something important or something life-changing, mm-hmm. or life-defining rather, mm-hmm. Needs to happen within the story. Otherwise, it's you tend to ask at the end of the story, okay, so what really happened? I mean, what was the point of the story? And I've read books like that too. And sometimes what happens is not really evident until, months after you've read the book. For example, I recently reread this book called Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. That's a coming-of-age story with a very macabre backdrop. And if you haven't read it, maybe, and you like, of course, coming-of-age stories, that's something that you should take a look at. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Also, the book cover of Fern Road is really, really interesting. Like there's a butterfly and what looks like a Bengali sari. If I'm not wrong, I don't know. I'm just assuming, I guess.
Yeah. It is.
It is? All right. Oh, great. So, what is the story behind the book cover? Like, how did your illustrator come up with it, or did you come up with it?
No. It was the illustrator at Speaking Tiger. The Australian cover is again very different. And both the butterfly and the sari are prominent props in the book, right? There's a butterfly. There's a picture in a notebook of a girl with a butterfly's wing, and that's where the butterfly comes from. And of course, the sari is also something that Orko experiments with. He tries wearing it and looking at himself in the mirror and seeing how he looks and trying to decide whether he likes it or not. So that's also an important thing in the story. So I think they sort of took these two elements, and I think the cover is brilliant. And I didn't ask for any revisions or anything. The moment I saw it, I said, "Yeah, I love it."
Yeah, yeah, it does tend to draw in one's eye, definitely.
Yeah.
So also, what was the story behind the book when it was published by the Australian publisher? The cover.
Give me a second.
Yeah. Do you have it with you? That would be great.
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
Okay, so pretty straightforward, yeah.
Pretty straightforward, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Also, are you currently working on your second novel? I dare say, if you can share any details.
Yeah, so basically the three main characters are sort of shaping up. It's a story about a city girl and a wild elephant mainly.
Okay.
And and that also has elements of, identity related questions. And so I'm working on that. I've been working on it for about 6 months now.
Okay.
So that's what I'm doing.
Great, sir. Looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Also, since we've talked so much about your childhood, what books did you read growing up? Like, who were the authors that left an impact on you?
That's a very, very hard question.
Well, just any that you can recall will be great.
Well, like I said, I used to raid my mother's bookshelf. So I read a lot of books that I was not meant to read so young. For example, I read Dostoevsky, and I read basically a lot of Russian authors. I read Anton Chekhov. And those definitely left an impression. And later in life, I think like many people of my generation, it was Murakami.
Yes, Murakami. Yes. Also, any Indian authors that were really memorable?
Well, today is Rabindranath's birthday, so I won't say Rabindranath because that would be too obvious. But I used to read this Bangla author called Hemendra Kumar Rai. So he used to write travelogues and non-fiction as well as detective stories and ghost stories. So he has a huge body of work and is not really well known outside Bengal. But I think he was a brilliant writer. He, I think, worked in the early 20th century.
Okay, all right. So, talking about Bangla, would you consider translating Fern Road into Bengali? And have a Bengali print of the book. Does that sound like a good idea to you? Would you want to do something like that?
That would be interesting, actually, because being set in Kolkata and with so much of Kolkata in the book, it would be great to see it in Bangla. But I don't think I have the skill to do it myself, unfortunately.
Yeah, maybe through a translator or somebody you can collaborate with.
That would be very interesting to have it in Bangla. Yeah.
Alright. Also, I've seen that you've talked about your book at the Kolkata Literary Festival. So, what was your experience like, at the literary festival, and how well do you think books are represented in today's day at the festival?
At the Kolkata Literary Meet, there are actually three.
Mhm.
So one of them is really excellent, and I have been going to that one for years now. The one that happens at the Victoria Memorial. The other two I'm not really sure of because I haven't really. I've gone maybe once to the APJ festival and once to the one that's held during the book fair. And they're also pretty extensive, and they have a lot of big name authors coming in. For example, I once heard Pico Iyer in the Kolkata Literature Festival, the one that's held with the book fair, and that was an amazing experience. You know.
Okay.
But yeah, the one that I attend regularly is the Kolkata Literary Meet.
Festival. All right.
Yeah,
All right.
the meet,
Great.
yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Could we, hear a few extracts or your favorite chapter from the Fern Road from you?
Okay, so
Readers would love
I'll basically I'll read the section that got this book published then.
Okay. Wow. Yes. Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Sounds
This is
great.
this is the part about the parrot, right?
All right. Yes.
So yeah, here goes. Orko was 10 years old when their neighbor, Mr. Sen, brought home a parrot in a rusty old cage from the fairground near Sialda station. He called her Benazir. She was green with a bright red beak. The first few times that Orko met Benazir, she sat sullenly in her cage. Sometime after she arrived, maybe it was a week or maybe it was two, Orko can't remember, Mr. Sen bought her a new cage. This was a grand affair that looked like a teepee glued onto the top of a bucket. The bars were of a golden hue. Inside was a swing that hung from 2 lengths of silver chains. The cage had 2 doors, one for Benazir and another, smaller, for her food. Orko would ring his neighbor's doorbell every afternoon. Has she learned to speak yet? He would ask. She's still young, Mr. Sen would say. She'll learn. Mrs. Sen told Orko how his mother worried when he was a baby. You didn't speak until you were almost 2, she said. All babies are different, I would tell your mother. She looked at Orko and smiled. Look at you now. At the time, Orko had just finished reading A Tintin Adventure, The Broken Year, a birthday present from Kundan, his father's friend. One afternoon, Mrs. Sen was away in the kitchen, and Orko didn't think she would hear him over the clatter of pots and pans. He walked up to the cage and in a squeaky voice said, Great greedy guts, just like the parrot from the Tintin book. Benazir didn't pay him any mind. She sulked. She opened and closed her beak noiselessly. Orko looked on with fascination at the bulge in her throat that moved up and down like a live creature. Orko went to see Benazir every day. Every day he would stand by her cage, feeding her chilies red and green and squawking, great greedy guts, at the mystified birds. Crows and sparrows would come and sit at the window like humans lined up to see an exotic creature at the zoo. Orko felt an urge to undo the clasp that kept Benazir. He wondered if she remembered how to fly. One day, as Orko sat on a stool by Benazir's cage, absent-mindedly passing red chilies to Benazir through the grill, she made a noise that was not her usual squawk. It sounded like an unremarkable twitter, different in tone and texture from the cuckoo's call or the pigeons or the sparrows, but bird speak nevertheless. Then she did it again, a little more spaced out this time. Great greedy guts, she said in a conspiratorial undertone. Great greedy guts, Orko replied, barely containing his delight. Great greedy guts, said Benazir again, rising to a fever pitch this time. Great greedy guts, she said again and again and again, until Mrs. Sen rushed in from the kitchen, staring at them in obvious glee. She clapped her hands. She brought Orko a cheese sandwich and said, Now teach her to say Hare Krishna and Lokhi Lokhi. One afternoon, a week or so later, Orko went to visit Benazir, only to find that the cage was empty. She's flown away, Mrs. Sen said to him. At the time, Orko had been surprised. But now he feels positive that Benazir hadn't flown away. She had died in her golden cage, of heartbreak probably. He remembers how she would, in the first days that he knew her, look past the grill of her cage, as if she didn't quite understand that it was there. He wonders if it is possible for a creature to learn the language of another kind of creature. When he was a young child, he would bark at dogs, mew at cats, moo at cows. There were no thoughts accompanying the sounds he made. He didn't feel like a cat when he mewed. The cows didn't pay him any mind as he mooed at them. The dogs sometimes barked back, but it sounded like they had caught him out as an imposter. When Orko imagines himself as an adult, living and working in a world run by his schoolmates and by the boys in the football field, he wonders how long it will be before he is found out, and if it is worth the effort to continue pretending that he is like everyone else. In his most hopeful moments, he imagines that everyone is as weird as he is, keeping up the charade of sameness, terrified of revealing their true selves. Nobody wants war, his grandfather had said to him once, as they watched the Republic Day parade on television. But there will always be armies, because no one has the courage to be the first to throw away their weapons.
Wow, that was amazing. Yes, I was so strong in imagery. Like when you were reading, I could just imagine scene by scene. It was really lovely, very heartfelt.
Thank you.
Would you like to read something else? Any other chapter or maybe extract that you like?
Yeah, sure. I'll just give me a second.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is a section where Orko has been left alone at home for the first time. So this is the first time he's spending a night by himself.
Okay.
The taillights of the taxi recede into the distance. They flicker as the decrepit contraption slows to a halt near the mouth of the lane. 4 quick flashes of yellow, and it's gone, leaving behind only a whiff of burnt diesel in the air. The one-legged signpost maintains its solitary vigil by the entrance. Orko pushes the gate open. It's so quiet that he can hear the flakes of rust coming off the hinges. The cluster of flats is a patchwork of dark and light, fluorescent white, incandescent yellow, shadowy gray. A cricket chirps in the distance. The stairwell is dark, but Orko knows each of the 42 steps, each crack in the concrete banister. He can't see the nameplate on the door as he feels his way around the padlock. The key turns with a click. He quietly slips off the padlock, but when he undoes the deadbolt, it shatters against the door panel. He closes the door behind him, quietly, as if he were an intruder in his own home. When he switches on the light, the sight of his hand on the watch is strange and unfamiliar. "Hello," he says to no one, because tonight he's alone. "Hello," he says again and again, varying the pitch of his voice, but it still doesn't sound right. This night of being alone came about suddenly. He fretted about the board examinations as he meandered through Fern Road after school. On the bus, he revisited the practice tests they were given, and he knew immediately that he had done poorly. When he was at the mouth of the lane, he thought of the stack of melamine bowls in the fridge, and his appetite was gone. At the front door, he fished out his keys from his pocket, but the padlock was gone. Confused, he rang the bell. "I have to leave for Hazaribagh tonight," Nandan said as he opened the door. So Nandan is his father. Confused. Okay. "Kabul Kaka has had a heart attack." Kabul is Orko's great uncle. Orko calls him Kabul Dadu. He's a doctor, and he once worked for the government of Bihar. Orko doesn't remember the specifics of how they're related, only that Kabul Dadu was born in Kabul. He's a little embarrassed by this because when they were on the train to Hazaribagh a few years ago, his father drew their family tree on a scrap of paper and marked the relevant branches. As the train pulled into the station, Nandan was at the door, restless, searching for a face in the crowd on the platform. Tenya, he called out, his face alight with a boyish smile that Orko had never seen before. He waved, and a man in the crowd waved back. The man ran alongside the train, boarding their compartment even before the train had come to a halt. Orko was surprised when Nandan embraced the man because he had never seen his father embrace anyone. This is Tenya Kaka, Nandan said. We've been friends for the longest time. The last time I saw you, you were a little baby, the man said to Orko. They drove for what seemed like hours until they came to a tall gate set in a boundary wall that looked like a giant mouse had nibbled off portions of it. Kawal Dadu was at the gate when they arrived. He looked older than Orko's father, but not quite as old as his grandfather. He lived by himself in a house that was the largest Orko had ever seen, and it looked like it was hundreds of years old. Much of the house was closed off. Windows were nailed shut, doors were boarded over, and across their frames were cobwebs that looked like they had hung there for decades. Kawal Dadu told Orko that the house had once been a palace. The stables had been converted into a garage, and by the stables was a small outhouse. Tenya lived there with his daughter, Lali.
Wow. Thank you for the reading.
Thank you.
Also, I noticed that in this passage there is mention of the Fern Road, the lane, the actual lane,
Yeah.
and where you say that Orko passes Fern Road. So, why did you decide to call the book by the name of this road? Why call it Fern Road?
That's a bit of a play on the first line of the book, because the first line says, I'll just read from it.
Okay.
Fern Road is not a road lined with ferns, right?
Yes.
So when you hear the name Fern Road, you think it will be a road lined with ferns, right?
Fern, yes.
So when you hear Orko is a boy, you'll think that Orko should like these things or be like that, or these should be his friends, but he's not what you think he should be. So that's the reason why I chose this name.
Wow, that's very deep and cleverly veiled. So that's lovely.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much, sir, for your time.
And thank you. Thank you. It was lovely talking to you.
Great. Lovely talking to you too, sir. Please do take care and stay safe.
Yeah, you too.
Yes.
You too. You too.
Great.
All right.
Bye, sir.
Bye-bye. Bye. Bye. Bye.